Welcome back to the panel discussion, Delivering on the Promise of the Cloud, sponsored by Leidos and Amazon Web Services on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. My guests today are Brett McMillan, Director of Federal Government Amazon Web Services, and Keith Johnson, Chief Technology Officer and Chief Engineer, Defense and Intelligence at Leidos. I'm your moderator, John Gilroy. Many have observed that silos of information in the federal government all over the place. Is it possible that this machine learning and artificial intelligence can that actually make data available between agencies?
Yeah, I think certainly that's the case. And it also includes making them available in a way that they can access through things like commercial cloud services. For instance, our NGA, which is the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, has been making more data available for other agencies for humanitarian disaster relief, like FEMA, even EPA or other organizations that can better understand some of the implications that can be derived through analyzing satellite imagery. That's just one example. But the idea of applying AI and making that data available in commercial cloud formats then allows agencies to discover and combine that data together. It's not just about discovery, it's about combining that data, which is really where the secret sauce is.
And there's a lot of secret sauce, especially with satellite images. Now they have satellites now that can see through the clouds. Mm-hmm. Half the world is in the dark. They have images that can come, and that's what I think that's the role of the federal government. Again, Brett, we're back to these federal data sets that have so much value.
Yeah, and it's not only across agencies, but also when you have multiple different agencies working together, what can they do to make a big outcome? So, for example, you take some data sets around crops or data sets around farming. So you've got USDA and USGS, U.S. Geological Survey, combining together to make data available. And then what can organizations do with that? So John Deere, for example, takes this data and they put these IoT sensors in the field. They put these IoT sensors on the tractors. And now they're taking all this data together, the weather data, the geospatial data, and the data that they're collecting from these IoT sensors, and they're making the farms more productive. So this is going to sound audacious, but if you have government agencies sharing together, you apply some machine learning and artificial intelligence, can you solve world hunger? Well, maybe.
Well, you can control the water supply, and that's the key factor there, is that in many parts of the United States, the water is the key component. If that can be controlled through artificial intelligence, that's a big win for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we actually are advancing not just analytics, but we call model-based system engineering. Because what you have to really do is apply really physics models to some of these problems, right? Like the hydrology problem requires sophisticated models for how water is transported, but it also requires up-to-date, real-time information about precipitation and about usage in order to get the fidelity that you need to make some of these predictions. Mm-hmm. And so when you're able to combine historical data, physics-based models with real-time information through IoT devices, now you're able to make very high-fidelity, exquisite predictions that can really advance our science and our understanding of really, really complex problems.
We're on Federal News Radio. If you listened for 24 hours, you'd hear all kinds of catchy terms. And you know the catchy terms: data lake, big data batch processing, machine learning models, a data hub. I mean, these are like shiny objects. So the question for you two is really, how can the listeners here avoid the next shiny object and focus on the agency goals? Like, that's what they have to do. The shiny objects are fine, but get the job done.
So you hit the nail on the head. I mean, there will always be that next new technology that
Human
everybody
beings
wants
love
to have.
shiny objects.
But what happens so often is the solution that's going to have the biggest impact for the federal government and the biggest impact for the citizens sometimes is not that latest, greatest technology, is not that latest, greatest shiny object. So, for example, the Veterans Administration, they had a website where VAs, in order to sign up for their benefits, they would have to go in and they'd have to use the exact right version of Internet Explorer and the right version of Adobe. And what it would return back, it would say upgrade things. Well, that was actually wrong. You actually had to use a lower version of Adobe to actually fill out things. And so they were finding that people that were successfully able to do it was down in the single percentages. And so what they did was they said, let's do something fairly simple. They designed a web form that's accessible from smartphones, from any certain type of computer, just an internet accessible web form. And that's a technology that's been around for decades. And so sometimes what it is
Nothing to do with big data, by the way.
Exactly. And so sometimes what you need to do is just start with the problem and then come up. And sometimes these solutions are complex. Sometimes we bring some of the latest and greatest advanced technologies. And sometimes you can just use something that's been around for a long time.
Yeah, Brett, that's exactly what I was going to mention as well. Instead of focusing on the terms today like data lake or data hub, what we focus on at Leidos is what is the mission outcome? What do we want to achieve? What do our customers want to achieve? So we have a process to go through to identify mission outcomes and then honestly start the other end of data. So you want to look at data and mission outcomes and how can the data that I have be used in a way to achieve a mission outcome. Then everything in between, the data lakes, the data hubs, the applications, the databases, the analytics, those are all tools in your toolbox, as we talked about earlier, in order to achieve that mission objective or outcome.
You know, Keith, earlier we talked about the productivity expert and eliminate and automate. Now, it's one thing to go to Jason's Donuts and automate things, okay? Now, with the federal government, we have all kinds of compliance and regulations to worry about. So this is adding the difficulty, isn't it?
Yeah, but you can use automation really to help achieve compliance much more easily. And that's what one big objective that we have at Leidos as well is to really you're trying to cut through the bureaucracy to get to outcomes. And so a lot of these things where it's check the box here, check the box there. How do I create a well-founded documented package that allows me to prove that I'm compliant without requiring hundreds or thousands of man hours? And so that's where automation can really help.
So, but some can argue is that, well, AWS has been there, done there, got the T-shirt. They're a compliant repository for that data. So that's 5 check boxes from the beginning.
And we inherit everything we can from Amazon.
We like to say that we remove the undifferentiated heavy lifting. So those compliance things that just come with the service it makes it so that organizations can now build on top of that. And Leidos has been great on helping the government agencies do some automation. And we're seeing organizations do things like DevOps and DevSecOps. And so what this means is that they've built their security into the actual development. And so the software developers are checking in their code. And these systems now, it's no longer a point in time, am I compliant? But instead, it's a continuous monitoring and a continuous modernization that's happening. And so when you start doing that, now these systems can grow in a very secure way in ways that can better serve the citizens with the changing needs that are coming each day, each year.
Yeah, one example is we working with Amazon in some of our just automating the security policy process. We reduced by 70% the labor hours required in order to achieve an ATO process. Mm-hmm.
Well, Brett, you ready for a question about Malcolm Gladwell?
Shoot, I'll give it a try.
Well, we all know the famous 10,000-hour rule. And what they've recently found is that, well, he was kind of right, but, kind of close. What people are saying is that, well, if John Gilroy practices the cello for 10,000 hours, and I'm thinking about the Redskins and everything else, and then Keith practices for 10,000 hours, and it's concentrated, it's dedicated, then he is actually going to be at the NSO, and he's going to be the one who is the world-famous cellist. And so this 10,000-hour rule doesn't always apply. So there are a lot of repetitive tasks in cybersecurity. Well, if a human has to just do something rote for hours and hours and hours, it seems like that's where you can apply the artificial intelligence or automate the system, because that'll make it more thorough.
Yes, it's the artificial intelligence. It's all the other tool sets that we provide. So when you take a look at some of these things, some of the things that have been around for a long time should be really easy for agencies to implement. So in cybersecurity, one of the things that would be super important is intrusion detection. Every system should have an intrusion detection system. Well, that is something that in some instances takes a fair amount of work to get there. You have to buy the right software, the right equipment, and have that. Well, we've taken the learning learnings from our millions of customers throughout the world, and we've said, wait a second, they all have this challenge, and it should be easy to deploy. So we've come out with a service called Guard Duty, which is an intrusion detection system, which you log in, and in a few minutes, you've set up your environment for intrusion detection. I'm not saying that that solves all your cybersecurity problems, but that takes something off of their plate, and now they can focus on all the other security things that are out there. And so what we're trying to do is take those common problems, automate it, and make it really simple for people to deploy.
So if Keith has a new task in front of him and he has 10 points on his checklist, he could start off with checking 4 of those because he's going to have old Brett figure that one out before you begin.
Right. Earlier we talked about standardization and how that's been very helpful in order to advance innovation and usage of cloud resources. That's also the case in cybersecurity. When you can start describing things with events with the same nomenclature, that's where you really get into the ability to automate cyber practices. Right now, the hardest thing about cyber is understanding context. You see events, you don't know if those events are routine. Is this one anomalous? Some of the reasons for that is because of the complexity of what they mean, and if they're described in one context with one system and a different context in a different system, then I can't really match those two events as being correlated. And so by standardizing the approach, which is what the cloud provides, as well as applying some smart AI ML correlation engines that kind of help do that contextual bridging, that's when you can get to a much higher level of cyber practice with lower resources.
You know, Brett, I made that silly story about the 10,000 hours practicing a cello. Then I said, wait a minute, it's orchestration. And the orchestration is AWS, Amazon Web Services, and Leidos. That's what's going on here, is that you both don't play, there's different instruments that have to be played in order to sound good. It's orchestration here where you get two that actually are what's the word? Synergy? I guess that's the word here, isn't it?
Yep. And by ourselves, we can't make an orchestra. So,
right, yeah, and that's it.
So it's great working with Leidos where they're able to take some of our best-of-breed services and apply them to federal government agencies and problems in ways that they never really have been able to do in the past.
Yeah, part of that partnership or synergy is taking what Amazon provides and then interpreting that in ways that our customers can consume it. And so it really helping our customers understand the security posture of the cloud, and then potentially adding in the compliance layers that our customers need in order to better and more effectively leverage the cloud. And we do that across the board.
Yeah, so let me give you an example of that that automation that's really helping out. One of the challenges that Congress has is that the number of requests that come to them, or the number of the questions, is not linear. It spikes up and down depending on. We just recently had an election, and so these congressional voicemail systems will fill up. And they have the same staff, whether or not there's a really big issue happening or not. And so one of the challenges is how do they handle that? And so if there's something very controversial happening, these voicemail boxes are filling up faster than people can actually get them out. And so companies have looked at this and said, well, what if we use Amazon? It can scale up, it can scale down. We can use things like serverless computing like Lambda that scales very quickly. And then what if we did things and use the same technology that the Amazon Echo uses and understand that, do a text-to-speech, and now these voicemail boxes are no longer filling out, they can scale up, and it's transcribing it for other folks. So a process that would take about 5.5 minutes for a staffer to listen to it and transcribe it now is happening in under 30 seconds.
And so they respond to the citizens' needs. Yeah. Keith, I was thinking about this whole idea of automation, and if you had a team and you're going to apply 40 hours of work of that team to design an IDS, let Brett do that. You can have your team go down to an agency, sit there, ask questions face to face to gain a deeper understanding of what the problem is, and let Brett do his stuff. Let him do the 16 hours of all the PhDs and data science, and then you can understand those needs, and then all of a sudden you have the synergy of 2 and 2 is 5.
Right. Yeah, we're certainly not afraid of the cloud. The cloud is coming, and we are welcoming the cloud because it allows us to deploy our smart domain experts to solve the higher level problems that our customers have. And then as as Brett's team continues to innovate and provide new services like a guard duty, then we'll evaluate that, bring it in once we can do the translation of compliance, and then we can take our resources that we're working that to something else. There's no shortage of good problems to go work, and so we're happy to leverage and stand on the shoulders of Brett and his team.
So, Brett, we're going back to an earlier phrase that you used, the phrase that pays in Federal News Radio. It's you want an agency to start with a question that they can't answer today, and then seek a way to use the data that they have to answer that question. I mean, that's really what we're talking about right now. I mean, and that's when the folks from asking the questions, that's what they should be asking is we have that. No, what about these images at HHS and radiology? What about the satellite images? Well, we never had time to, NASA used to crowdsource that solution. Remember that? They used to just say, third grader from Des Moines, come on in and help us understand this, not crowdsourcing. So that's really where we're going at, is where the agencies can solve problems that they'd like to solve, but they don't have the assets or the time.
Yeah, that's what's really super exciting is that for decades, IT organizations within the federal government have been limited by the problems they're willing to solve by what was available in their data center, or was limited by what their budget have, and then they were limited by time to deploy those things. And today, when they can move into a cloud environment and get near instant access to best-in-breed solutions, what we're finding is these federal government agencies are tackling problems that they never really tried to do in the past. And so today, when organizations move into and they leverage all the tools that are in the cloud, their ability to solve problems is really only limited to their imaginations.
That's where Leidos comes in.
Exactly.
Is trying to understand that and having that. It's a social skill set of asking the right questions to find out in a polite manner, but taking all that data they have right in front of them.
You're right. I mean, innovation happens when people kind of rise above the daily grind and look out and ask themselves, what else is out there? What else can I leverage? And who could potentially answer the problems that I have right now? And it's through collaboration, partnerships, collaborating with our customers, as well as getting access to the diverse data and ideas that this great nation has in order to solve and innovate at the pace that we need to in order to stay abreast and really keep up with the world economy that we're facing right now.
I'd like to thank today's guests, Brett McMillan, Director of Federal Government, Amazon Web Services, and Keith Johnson, Chief Technology Officer and Chief Engineer, Defense and Intelligence at Leidos. I'm your moderator, John Gilroy, and you're listening to Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Delivering on the Promise of the Cloud.
On behalf of Leidos and Amazon Web Services, thank you for joining us. The archive session will be available shortly. This concludes our discussion. Thank you.